Okay, we're back for the second half. 7.5, the International Farm Camp, Hall Road at Tiptree, and it's Nadine Calder to present.
Thank you. Good evening. This is an application for a variation of a condition for the International Farm Camp, which currently has permission for 55 caravans to be occupied during the months of February till November of any year. This condition seeks permission for the 10 caravans outlined in red to be occupied for the additional 2 months, so December and January. That's because the fruit picking season has been made longer by recent polytunnels that have been put on site. So they need to have staff available on site or resources available on site to pick the fruits and then clear the site and prepare them for the next season during the additional 2 months. The camp itself, so the 10 caravans amounts to less than 20% of the camp. So the camp itself remains predominantly seasonal. And you can see the caravans have been carefully selected to be the ones that are furthest away from the residential properties, which are to the north and east of the site. And if we just look at some photographs, you can see that there are quite established trees along Hall Road. There is no impact in terms of traffic. The Highway Authority haven't objected, and with regards to the location of the caravans, it's considered that the impact on residential amenity will be limited, which is why a conditional approval is recommended.
Thank you. Can I call Steve Bayes, please? Thank you for waiting. You have 3 minutes. The bell will go after 2 minutes. The time will start when you press the button in the middle.
I'm objecting on the grounds of highway safety, entering and exiting both ends of Hall Road. Hopefully the planning officer will show you the areas that I mean. I would prefer the decision to be delayed or deferred rather than approved or refused. I believe a deal can be done to improve the access into Hall Road. Hall Road is a single track. There's no passing, there's no footpaths. The site originally was for international students, and they were pedestrians and cyclists. They had no vehicles. Recently, this status has changed, where residents of the site are older and adult workers. There are 60 caravans with 4 adults in each. Highway safety is becoming an increased issue with the residents of Hall Road. We have an opportunity to improve safety. Hall Road at present would not pass highway safety, so I disagree with the officer's comments. You cannot enter Hall Road and see what's coming out. Any new development would normally have a bell mouth entering it. You cannot enter any part of Hall Road. If a car is exiting Hall Road, you have to reverse onto a B road on the Malden end, which is on your left-hand side there, or if you're entering from Station Road, which is not actually in your picture there, again, if you have a car exiting Hall Road, you have to reverse. It's not a B road, but it is a major road. The Parish Council had concerns over the caravans being used as permanent dwellings, but I believe the planning officer has addressed this issue with time restraints over the length of time that the occupants will be there. I believe highways have not understand the current access problems and the future impact. And I believe that, as I understand at the moment, it's around 15% of the occupants have cars. I believe that's going to increase, and I think there needs to be a further time to actually look at this and try and come up with to relieve the impact of this development. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms Calder, do you want to respond?
Yes, please, thank you. Just to clarify, the site has consent for 55 caravans, not 60. And I've been told that there's up to 4 workers in a caravan, so not more than, so they probably don't all have 4, but they could have 4 workers living in there. In terms of highways, what I've discussed with the highway officer is, what needs to be understood is that the use of the caravans is a matter of fact. So from February until November, the 55 caravans can be occupied, and that will have a certain amount of traffic associated with this. In the months of December and January, the site should not be occupied, so there should be no traffic. The occupation of 10 caravans in those 2 months will have a certain amount of traffic, but it will not be at the level of the 55 during the other months. So because of that, there's actually not an increase in traffic. There may be an increase in traffic during those 2 months, but considering that a higher amount of traffic is acceptable in the other months, there's no objection in terms of highway safety or efficiency. The concerns that we've just heard are understood. The problem is the scope of this development cannot be held responsible for improvements that need to be made here, which is the junction with Moorland Road, I believe, or Station Road, which is not on this plan, because like I said, it's not an actual increase in traffic, it's just a slight increase during 2 months of the year. So I would respectfully ask you not to put a condition on, because I don't actually think it's reasonable. It's not within the scope of this application, and that is the reason why we said that there is no impact in terms of highway safety.
Okay, myself then Councillor Chillingworth. Mine's a comment, and it's one that I've got to be careful how I say this now. When the 55 caravans came to this committee, we kicked up quite a lot of fuss about the highways issues, and because highways would not back it up, there was nothing we could do about it. And I understand fully what the officer is saying. There is no theoretical increase. In fact, there's a significant decrease in those months, and therefore we could not reasonably ask for any highways improvements. But I do agree with Mr. Bays that actually, yes, it should be sorted out. But I don't think there's anything this committee can do to do that. And I would love somebody over the other side to come up with a reason why we could get the improvements done. But if highways don't require them, I think we've been down that road before. Councillor Chillingworth.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I, like you, feel that there's nothing we can do as far as highways are concerned with this particular application. I think it's a matter perhaps of the local councillors taking this up with the parish council, town council I think it is in Tiptree, and discussing it as a long-term problem with highways, and take it to the highways panel if there is a genuine problem here. Of course, money would obviously have to be spent, and local people can get money out of the highways panel if there is a good case made. So apart from that, I don't think we can do anything. However, as far as the application is concerned, I do understand why this is necessary from the point of view of Tiptree Jams. After all, they are one of the major employers, businesses in the borough. They are continuing to expand, as we know. The husbandry of fruit has been changing, and more fruit is being grown undercover in tunnels. so that you get a greater throughput of locally grown fruit out of season, basically. I know cases where 4 crops of strawberries are produced a year throughout the year under tunnels. So I can well see why this is needed. The extension of their season is genuine, I'm quite sure. We're only talking about a condition, changing a condition in this case. So I would like to propose that we do accept this proposal. Thank you.
Is that seconded by you, Councillor Scott? We have Councillor Hazel to speak.
Thank you, Chair. Is it not within our remit to defer in order to ask County to look at this again? If local residents are serious in their, they have to deal with the dangers on this road and the problems it is causing, do we not have any powers in that regard?
You have met highways, haven't you? Councillor Jarvis?
Thank you, Chair. Matter of just clarification here, please. Under paragraph 4.4, it says that no individual workers are likely to be on site for longer than 10 months, which infers that some may be. But further in that paragraph, it says the current application would therefore not result in permanent occupancy by individuals. There seems to be a contradiction there, and is it covered off in the conditions that would avoid that? Thank you.
Yes, that is covered by condition. What is meant by that is that one seasonal worker is not usually longer in a caravan for more than 10 months. It does say that it's likely to be closer to 45 months a year. So they would, because the 10 months is the current season, which is February till November, with 10 of them being able to be used for 12 months, they would still have to leave after the 10 months. And that is what condition 3, I believe, requires. So any one worker cannot stay longer in a caravan for more than 10 months. And they, like the application you've discussed before, they have to keep a register of the people living there and their permanent addresses. So that is covered by this condition. With regard to Councillor Hazel, I would recommend not to defer it for that reason, simply because the application as it is acceptable with regards to highways impact. Anything you would want out of that, like I said, is just simply not in the scope of this application. If this application was new, 55 new caravans, we could ask for financial contribution towards improvements to the road. But it's not part of this, so any deferral is not really changing the situation, to be honest.
Okay, I think that's all the points answered. We have what do we call it? Proposal, thank you. Lots of words there. It has been duly seconded. All those in favour of accepting it?
That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 in favour, Chairman.
All those against?
None against.
Abstentions?
And 1 abstention.
Okay, we now move on to 7.6, 35 Yorick Road, West Mersey, and Chris Harden to present.
Thank you, Chairman. The application is for a replacement dwelling, and members will probably recall the site from a previous application for works to the property. This is the street here, and the site there, and this is the block plan showing the proposal to replace the dwelling. You'll note that on the eastern side the dwelling will be removed or moved away from number 37 by about 0.2 of a metre, and this side the dwelling will be going closer to number 33 by about 1.2 metres, as was approved previously with the extension works. So just remind you of the street scene that's looking towards the property here. Neighbouring property next to it, single storey. That's looking the other way to that's the neighbouring property. That's the site there. And this is the view from the neighbour's rear garden. And another view from the neighbouring property looking back towards the site, which is there. And then a view from the neighbour's driveway looking towards the site. And this is a view from the other side, the other neighbour looking towards the gable here. So this element will be coming 1.2 metres closer to this property as before. And then a further, more distant view of that gable. And a view from the street. So that's the existing property, showing the single story. Then we move on to the proposal. So the proposal will be going 1.2 metres higher, as you can see here, as it was proposed before. It'll be 1.2 metres closer to the boundary on this side here, and rearwards the extension will project 4.3 metres, so that's this element here, and that will be raised to a height of 3.9 metres, and then at the front you're raising the roof by 0.5 metres, located there. And that shows the internal layouts of that proposal. So in terms of planning considerations, the policies are outlined in the committee report, and as indicated, the scheme is very similar to that which was approved with the extensions to the property. And as before, the design and scale of the resultant building is considered acceptable in terms of its impact in the street scene. It is a varied street scene, as you saw from the photographs. There are some single-storey dwellings, and further down some two-storey and 1.5-storey dwellings. So it's considered acceptable again in that respect. The front wing is also lower than was previously approved. The rear wing is just 0.1 metres higher than was previously approved. And in terms of residential amenity, this is a key issue, and as before, it's not considered that the proposal would be causing a significant detrimental impact on neighbouring amenity in terms of an overbearing impact or a loss of light or outlook. Indeed, it's considered there'll be a slight improvement because the dwelling is going a little further away from the neighbouring property to the right as you look at it from the front. The rear wing, as I said, is going 0.1 higher, but that's not considered to result in a significant detrimental impact on the neighbouring property. So in conclusion, it's acceptable in terms of its impact on the street scene and residential amenity. So the recommendation is approval. And there's one slight amendment to one of the conditions in terms of materials. It should be that materials should be agreed by condition rather than as matching existing. Thank you.
Thank you. If I can call Mary Neville, please. You've seen how it's done. 3 minutes. Bell will go at 2. Press the button when you're ready to start.
Our main objections to this replacement dwelling are listed in the committee report and are largely the same as for the previous application 151318. for first floor and rear extensions, for which approval with conditions has already been granted. However, I have been asked to say on behalf of our neighbours, near neighbours and ourselves that we still strongly object to the demolition of a perfectly sound bungalow and with the replacement of a much larger, taller building on this very small plot. We also considered that as a replacement building, it could be built in materials which would match the existing bungalow and fit in with the surrounding bungalows and street scene. This was a requirement in the original recommendation, but sadly appears to have now been amended. Lastly, we ask that to allay our concerns that there could be further development to the site in the future, that condition number 5, which was applied to the previous very similar plans, should also be applied to this replacement dwelling. Condition number 5 states that no enlargement, improvement or other alteration to the dwelling should be erected or carried out except in accordance with drawings showing the sitings and design of such enlargement, improvement or other alterations which shall previously have been submitted to and approved in writing by the local planning authority. And the reason given is the site is already heavily constrained and developed, and any further development on the site would need to be considered at such time as it were to be proposed. This would not affect the present plans and has been recommended in the recommendations by the planning officer. I'm sorry if I've repeated anything, but these items are quite important to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jamie Kelly. 3 minutes, Bill will go to.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, Chairman and members. I'm the agent acting for this proposed replacement dwelling at 35 Yorick Road, West Mersey, and obviously speaking in support of the proposal. The proposed application, as already mentioned, is almost identical to the previous application that was approved by this committee back in August. That scheme was for the extension to an existing dwelling rather than replacing it. Due to the amount of demolition required in the previous application, which was changed quite a lot during the process of determining that application, quite a lot of things were changed, walls were moved, so it meant that basically a lot of the building would need to be demolished, and if that building were to collapse during the construction, therefore there'd be no building on site, and effectively there would be no planning permission in place. So we were advised that we really need to look at a replacement dwelling just in the event that this happened. So essentially it's the same dwelling as approved. The proposed application is slightly smaller in volume than the proposed scheme to allow for improved access and construction and maintenance. As in the approved application, the proposal involves increasing the ridge height of the main roof running east-west by 1.2 metres to provide first floor accommodation within the roof space. The overall width of the main property is also increased by 1 metres. This is 0.2 metres less than the approved scheme. The objections that have been raised on this application are similar to the objections raised in the previous application and have been addressed in the same way as the previous application. The officer's report concludes that the proposed scheme is acceptable in terms of its scale and impact on neighbouring residential amenity. Excuse me. These were also the conclusions reached on the previous approved scheme, which extended the dwelling rather than replacing it. The previous proposal had been amended in a number of ways to attempt to alleviate some of the neighbours' concerns, including the reduction of the roof height to the rear extension to lower it to the height that would be allowed under permitted development. The latest proposal carries through all of these amendments and is therefore considered acceptable. The previous conditions requested by the members can also be applied to this approval, and we're happy to accept those. With this in mind, I hope you're able to support this application, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. If we go back to Chris Harding to respond, especially around, I believe the item 5 is probably referring to removal of permitted development rights.
Yes, Chairman, just to go back to the points made, we can't really object to the demolition of a sounder bungalow, even if it is, in perfect condition. That's not a planning reason to object to its demolition. In terms of materials, the previous scheme did put forward the same materials as are being put forward before, as being put forward now. The previous condition had a matching materials condition because the whole of the original building was going to be having this hardy board material on it. So that is the same as previously approved, essentially, and that's considered acceptable in this street scene. Yes, in terms of condition 5, that would be reapplied. I think it's important not just to remove items such as large dormers, but also to make sure that there's not going to be a raising of the roof to the rear, for example. So that condition will be reapplied to control works to that property. So I think that would cover what was raised, Chairman.
Okay, I have two councillors to speak, myself and Councillor Scott. My main concern was making sure that the permitted development rights were removed, and now that's been done, I feel reasonably happy, or as happy as I can be with this application. I don't like the idea of a perfectly serviceable bungalow being torn down, but it's not a material planning consideration and not something that would ever stand up in appeal. And because of that, I will propose that we accept the recommendation with the added conditions around permitted development rights being removed. Councillor, and that's been seconded by Councillor Hazel. Councillor Scott.
I just would like to be absolutely clear about the matching materials and whether we can't accommodate the objector's request on that. I agree that removing item 5 makes it much better, but I'm not quite clear why we can't meet that request.
Yes, Chairman. Well, as we've approved that material previously, it's not really going to be possible to say you can't now have that material, in my view. We've previously accepted it, and it was shown on the previous drawings. So to backtrack now, it's not really feasible, I would say.
Can you show us what it is?
Sorry, Chairman. I haven't got a picture of what it is. No, it's sort of a type of sort of weatherboarding, a sort of generally a lightish finish of weatherboarding. Fairly narrowish panels, as sort of shown here, really. It's that sort of appearance, but I haven't got a picture of it, Chairman.
Think with an OK, I think, is the the phrase. We don't have anyone else left to speak. We do have a proposal on the table. All those in favour of accepting?
That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 in favour, Chairman. That's unanimous.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to item 7.7. This is Homecroft, Chapel Lane, West Burgolt, and it's Carl Allen to present.
Good evening, members. Some of you may recall we visited this site about just over 3 weeks ago. Just to go through what the proposal is, as you can see, it's for a new access drive. It's for 3 new dwellings, 1 being a detached house and also being 2 detached bungalows, and also the conversion of the existing bungalow, which is called Plain Cottage, into a house. So let's move on. This is the site location plan and also the layout. This one here is plot 1, which would be the 4-bedroomed house. The private access would come down here. This is Plain Cottage here, which is the bungalow, which we made into a detached house with a first floor extension. This is the existing dwelling of Homecroft, which isn't part of the application. The private drive would continue this way to the 2 detached bungalows here and there, and there would be 2 turning points here. As you'll see in the report, so I'll just go back, sorry. These 2 garages would be under, for the internal space, under the parking standards, so it couldn't be considered to be a parking space. But as you can see, there are 2 clear parking spaces indicated for each of the bungalows, and plenty visitor park in front of these. In the last in the last month actually, there's been quite a debate about the verge in front of the plot 1, and does it form part of the highway or not? On this plan, although it's going to be very hard to read, it does show that the verge that would be there would be 1.5 metres wide from the fence, proposed fence, and also the edge of the highway. This, as we're here, I think it's worth reading from the amendment sheet actually. This has been provided by the applicant via highways, and I think it's best if I read it to give you a clear indication to the key. The land coloured yellow, which is obviously, go back, the Chapel Lane here and also Spring Lane further down, is the extent considered to form part of the publicly maintainable highway in the area of concern, whilst the land coloured green has been acquired by Essex County Council for highways purposes and is also considered to form part of the publicly maintainable highway. The highways officer has also gone on to say that the verge immediately outside the application site, which is the area in question here, is not owned by highways and is private land, with the edge of the carriageway being considered to be the highway boundary on that side. So that will become relevant later, but as the plan was up, I thought it was worthwhile showing it to you. This is the plot 1, which would have the frontage here and would front into the highway. This is Plain Cottage, and you can just about make out, if I can get my finger on it, the existing ridgeline of the bungalow Plain Cottage. These are plots 2 and 3. They both share the same design. Members will remember when we visited the site in this location does fall away quite a bit, hence why we have... I'm going to go back. Well, we have quite a wide plinth here, and with like a raised, basically like a patio and steps leading down to the garden. It's also shown an elevation here as well. That's just an example of one of the garages. This is an artistic impression of plot 1, which would front the highway. That would be the extended Plain Cottage by the first floor. These would be plots 3 and 4, no, 2 and 3 and 4, the 2 bungalows at the rear of the site. And that is an artistic impression of the street scene, this being the existing dwelling of Homecroft, plot 1 here, and then the extended Plain Cottage here. These are photographs of the site. You'll see here, this is the entrance to Valley View, Home Croft, the existing dwelling being here, and Chapel Lane running there. This is a view looking down into Valley View. And it will move one time. Perhaps it won't. Any idea why it's not moving? So just wait a few seconds for it to catch up. It's just frozen on that one for some reason. Well, I'll continue anyway and try and catch up later with that. So you will see that from the report we've had quite a few objections to this. I think the report itself is quite comprehensive, but I think the two areas which need to be concerned to be discussed are that of the design of the scheme and also highways. So regards to the design of the scheme, it's been suggested that the proposed layout is an overdevelopment of the site and also a cramped form of development, not in keeping with the area. I think you can see from the page 109, which is the first page of the report, which shows the location plan, that there's a fair mix of plot sizes there. Some very large ones, say Apple Tree to the southeast, but say further north in Valley Crescents there are more smaller sizes. It's worth pointing out as well that for 3-bedroom houses or dwellings, our policy states that the minimum size for the garden should be 60 square metres. Of the 3-bedroom dwellings which are proposed on this, the smallest one actually has a curtilage of 120 square metres. So I think you can see that is quite generously over provides on our standard, whereas for the 4-bedroomed plot, the standard's 100 square metres of amenity space, and this provides 110 square metres. So I think that demonstrates that the plot is quite spacious for the development which is being proposed, and the plot size it's a mix of areas, so it's not against the grain of development in the area. It's also worth saying as well that this was subject to quite an extensive pre-app with the council's own urban designer, and there were quite a few changes, and this application is actually a result of the final scheme which was agreed upon in principle. So the design is therefore considered acceptable. Return to highways, there's been quite a few comments that Chapel Lane itself is quite a busy, narrow road. Let's just see if it moves on a little bit. No, it's not moving on whatsoever. So members will hopefully have seen that it is quite a narrow road. It does fall down the hill, and highways have... We might have a dual.
Which one you want now?
Each one. They're none of mine. No, none of mine. Let's go for...
You can select where you want to go to.
Okay, let's move in. Okay. Fingers crossed. So again, this just like shows the existing dwelling where plot 1 would go. Again, this is a Chapel Lane looking up. This is going into the site with Clean Cottage there. Going further into the site to a space where the bungalows would be starting to be located. This shows the general area for the bungalows, and I think you can see, members will recall that the land did drop away around this area. And again, with I think that's Spring Lane behind those trees there. Let's go back. So with regards to the highways, as outlined in the report, the parking is considered adequate, although the garages on 2 occasions don't internally meet the requirement to be counted as a parking space. There are still the parking spaces of 2 for each dwelling, as well as additional visitor parking, which is being provided. And the issue of the verge, I believe, has been dealt with thoroughly and to a good conclusion. So therefore, the recommendation is for approval with the subject to the conditions.
Thank you. Can I call Bob Tyrrell, please? You've seen how it's done. You'll get 3 minutes. The bell will go after 2, saying you've got 1 minute left. The time will start when you press the button.
Good evening. My name is Bob Tyrrell. I'm Chair of West Borough Planning Committee. I also have an architectural practice, and I was responsible for writing the village design statement, which reflects the character of the village. This was adopted by CBC on the 12th of December 2011. I'm here tonight because the application ignores many of the basic principles set out in the VDS, which should be considered when applications are determined. The parish council are concerned at the poor design quality and not against the development in principle, but feel strongly that this application is not the right solution, that our VDS seeks a better quality of design. The first knowledge of any development was when the site was brutally cleared, including large trees and most hedges, as you can see on the photographs. The lanes are a unique part of West Berkholt heritage and should be preserved. When you compare the existing built form to the proposals, they are out of keeping. A smaller development with less parking, better gardens and scope to reinstate the traditional hedgerows would be far more important. The images show a picket fence along the back end of the road. This actually reduces the lane width. Picket fences are not traditional in the village. The original hedgerows set back 3 feet from the road edge would have been more appropriate, but would have made the site far more smaller. The application drawings are of poor quality and, dare I say, not terribly accurate. I've checked the site plan against electronic survey. The site is shown much larger on the application, in fact 5 foot wider on the north and southern boundaries. This creates a false impression of the space on the site. On your site visit, you will have seen there's a considerable slope across the site, but we do not have a full topographical survey. As a result, the bungalows at the rear appear to ignore the site contours. The living rooms at the bungalows are some 5 feet out of the ground, so that you need a flight of stairs to reach the garden. There is no ecological report on the site. The house on plot 1 is too close to Chapel Lane, and this is out of keeping with all other buildings fronting Chapel Lane. The inline parking arrangement is, to say the least, exhilarating, as you will have to reverse uphill some 85 feet to reach the access road. Parking could be better designed and include a disabled space. The local architecture is predominantly 1960s, with the buildings set on modest plots. A more contemporary architectural approach, utilising the ground levels, would be more appropriate. The scheme has a very urban approach and not appropriate to the lanes. If you live in a village, you will appreciate our concerns. The parish council is seeking that the planning committee consider refusing the application for the above reasons. Thank you very much.
Could I call Steve Norman, please? You'll have 3 minutes. The bell will go at 2.
Yes, good evening. The scheme before you is the culmination of over 15 months of discussions and negotiations with officers. It was the beginning of July 2014 when first contact was made, which was a meeting on site with the Highway Authority. As this meeting established that there were unlikely to be any objections in highway terms, a preliminary inquiry was submitted and an associated meeting was held on site with the planning officer. Considerable discussions and negotiations then took place as to the most appropriate form of development for the site, with the urban designer also having an input. Regard was also had to the West Berkholt parish plan. After careful consideration and research, which revealed that recent and new developments in Burgold appear to comprise only of very large houses, it was decided to introduce 2 very modest bungalows into the scheme. These will be ideal for people wanting to downsize and for the older generation, which is a desire contained in the Burgold Parish Plan. As the scheme evolved, a further meeting was held with the planning officer and the urban designer, and my client also met with representatives of the Parish Council's Planning Committee, who were generally supportive of the proposed scheme. At this point, 9 months after negotiations began, a formal application was submitted, since when another meeting was held on site with officers and further fine-tuning has taken place. Also, as a result of concerns raised by local residents, even though there is no evidence of any potential flooding issues, each property is to be provided with a rainwater harvesting system. Parking facilities that accord with the Council's adopted standards are proposed for each dwelling, with some having a greater number of spaces than the minimum, whilst the private garden areas are all in excess of minimum requirements. With the use of appropriate materials, I share the view of the urban designer that this scheme will make a positive contribution to the village. It is noted that some residents have concerns about visibility in the verge in front of the site. Let me assure residents that visibility displays in excess of those required by the Highway Authority will be available for the proposed access drive, and that the proposed fence and hedge planting is to be provided behind the route line of the original hedge, meaning that a raised verge in front of Plot 1 can be retained, even though the Highways Records Office have confirmed that the extent of the highway at this point is in fact the carriageway edge and does not include the verge. It is perhaps understandable that some local residents may be opposed to the development, as people generally don't like change. However, the scheme has been very carefully designed to ensure that the amenities of local residents are not harmed, and that an attractive, spacious and landscape-dominated scheme will result. My clients and I are grateful to the helpful contributions from officers and the urban designers, and sincerely hope that members will grant planning permission in accordance with the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Could I ask that people allow the speakers to speak, please? Thank you. Councillor Harrington.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, fellow councillors. Councillor Willits was going to present his call in. He's been taken ill. He sends his apologies. He's asked me to speak for him. This application is an overdevelopment of an infill site. This parcel of land used to be the garden of the original Homecroft. In a sensitive area of this village, with substandard site layout and design, especially as regards the way the bungalows approach the slope, and in particular Site 1. There remain concerns about the junction of Valley View and Chapel Lane as far as the verge is concerned, and the possibility of some land grabbing of the boundaries there. My main reason for asking you to refuse this is, with regard to overdevelopment, it's the prominence of the building at Site 1. It is over-prominent, and I'll speak more in a few seconds about that. I would like to reiterate some of the words of Bob Tyrrell concerning the West Burgold Village Design Statement. I've got a copy of it here tonight. It appears in full in the Local Development Framework Committee meeting at which it was adopted. Because it was adopted by Colchester Borough Council, it forms part of planning policy and it must be taken into account. In several ways, it has been ignored. May I give you 3 examples? Design Guide 2 speaks of the remaining hedgerows, trees and copses should be retained. You've seen evidence that they have already been burnt out, and that is in contravention to condition 12 in your report, which says that that should not have taken place prior to development being commenced, but should have been safeguarded. Well, that hasn't got off to a very good start, has it? Design Guide 5 does mention that garden sizes may need to be substantially larger than other minimum standards. That appears in the West Burgle Village Design Statement. But my main point is this, Design Guide 10, Village Design Statement. Any infill development, which this is, should reflect the character of the surrounding area. Now, I ask, what is the character of Chapel Lane? And I would answer it in two ways. One is it's rather quaint, but most importantly, it is characterised by space. And the space occupation of this over-prominent proposal of Site 1 to build a large house on that junction spoils the character of this area. It is in contravention of the village design statement. It goes against the character of Chapel Lane. That village design statement, design guidance, I remind you with respect, is part of CBC Planning policy. Please give attention to it. Now, a little bit finally of the history here. You can see from the support behind me that this application is very unpopular with local residents. 3 members of the parish council are here to lend support to opposing it, among them the chairman, and you've already heard the chairman of the planning committee. Both, I can speak for Councillor Willits, both borough councillors oppose this application. The case officer and I were in contact during his period of determination, and there were times he told me that he was minded to refuse it. And then along comes the urban designer. Perhaps it's an unfortunate title in this rural area of a rural village in our borough, that an urban designer changes the case officer's mind, and now you have recommendation of approval. If for no other reason, please ask the case officer again to show you that picture of that junction characterised by space, and satisfy yourselves that if a large building is put there, that the character of Chapel Lane is not spoilt, because I tell you it will be. Please refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you. If you go back to the officer to respond.
Just going back to Councillor Harrington's very last point about my conversations with him and to refuse it. It's fair to say that when the preliminary inquiry was made, originally I was not the case officer dealing with this. It was another officer and also the urban designer. So hence when it landed on my desk, it was a rather cold application with no history with myself. And the part of the application I was very unhappy about was the relationship with the 2 proposed bungalows, which, if we take a quick look at the site plan, next one, which were these 2 here, those 2 bungalows, I was unhappy with the relationship between those 2 bungalows. Following discussions with the urban designer and also the agent Steve Norman, we met on site, had a walk around the site, and via discussions and thinking what other options could be achieved at the site, I was minded to agree with the opinion of the urban designer at the time that this was in fact a suitable relationship with no harm in the wider area and no amenity issues to each other. So that's that issue hopefully cleared up and explains why I was originally minded to refuse it, because of the relationship with the 2 bungalows and no other reason. Going back to Bob Tyrrell's point about the site cleared, as members will see from the photographs and from the site visit, the site has been cleared. It was originally the garden of Homecroft, and it is perhaps unfortunate that the site was cleared before making the application. But unfortunately, this is something which is a reasonably common practice, and is something, unless it's a conservation area or perhaps a PD rights have been removed or there's conditions on there. It's something that as a planning authority we actually have no control over. So in an ideal world it wouldn't have been cleared, but it happens unfortunately. I take the point that hedgerows are reasonably more appropriate for this area. There are more hedgerows on the opposite side of this road, which I think you can just see there. However, as you will see further up there, just past the junction with Valley Lane, we have like close bordered fencing there. So it's a real mix. So the fact that it doesn't include a hedgerow, from us isn't too detrimental to the street scene when there's a mix of boundary treatments to the highway. With regards to the comment that the design is poor quality, obviously we have the comments of the urban designer who supports the application, and in fact if I go back to the artistic impression, so the plot 1 would fairly mirror the existing house. It would be slightly closer and orientated slightly closer to the highway than Homecroft at the moment, but there would be a garden, a picket fence and the 1.5 metre verge in front of it. So I think that artistic impression gives a reasonably attractive view of the site. With regards to parking, again, highways have raised no objection to the application. The 2 bungalows especially have more than adequate car parking, are located close to parking points, reversing points. Plain Cottage here would maybe have to access the site by reversing in so they could leave in a forward gear, which given the majority of the characters is not out of the question. Whereas this one here would have a parking reversing area, so you turn and head there. So there is no objection from highways, and I say it does over-provide on the parking spaces. Overdevelopment we've already touched upon, with the plot sizes being larger than our standard. So again, that would tie in with the village design statement, which requires garden sizes substantially larger than standard. And as I say, with the 3 bedrooms all being double our standard size, and the character of the mix of plots of the area, again, is considered acceptable. I can't really agree after you see the artistic impression of plot 1 with Homecroft that the plot 1 spoils the character of the area.
Councillor Jarvis.
Thank you, Chair. I think that this development here, it highlights the benefit of a site visit. If you go to this particular site, you will see that the area has a distinct scenic appeal. It is very low density, it's spacious, it has character. The plot itself does require redevelopment, but I think this is an overdevelopment of this particular plot. I don't think the designs which are shown up there are conducive to the area at all. The picket fence, to me, is completely out of character and looks twee, if anything. So I think we must take into consideration what the ambience of the area really is, and if you go there and look at it, this is part of West Berkholt that is appreciated by local people, and I think a development of this size will be to the detriment of the area, and I think the application should go away and be reconsidered in a different design. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jarvis. I would really like to agree with you. However, there are certain things that are subjective, there are certain things that are objective. Parking has been mentioned. I know a little bit about parking. There are enough spaces on this site. That effectively is the end of the conversation. It meets our criteria. We cannot refuse it on parking. Design-wise, could be said to be subjective, but we had a training course showing how that was objective. And since it meets the design guide, or the Essex design guide, I don't think we can turn it down on those grounds. Amenity. Now, yes, it should be spacious in this area. The majority of the plots are getting almost twice as much as what our policy says. And I don't see how we can ask for much more than that. I don't particularly like the way the two bungalows are. Again, this is where it comes in as subjective. However, they're not overdeveloped because there's enough space around both of them. They meet our criteria that we set out as a council. They meet the Essex Design Guide. I personally can't think of a single reason why we could refuse this application where they wouldn't simply go to appeal, win the appeal and win cost against us. And I'd be really interested to find out if anyone has got an idea as to where they are, because I don't think it's the greatest development, but I don't think it's by any means the worst development either. Councillor Scott. Councillor Scott.
I thought there would be somebody before me, sorry. I was just wondering whether I feel very upset that the Village Design Guide can be afforded so little consideration, because actually local amenity should start with the local community, but I do hear that it is only part of that the consideration. But I wonder if we are able to stipulate something around the reinstatement of natural hedges rather than picket fence, because that is definitely out of keeping with what was there before they raised it to the ground.
Councillor Hayes.
Well, Mr. Tyrrell relied on the design guide relating to the village, and I think that where it conflicts with the Essex design guide, which I don't have to have with me, surely takes precedence over the Essex design guide, and I think we ought to be considering the village design guide. And I would like to suggest that when it talked about retention of existing hedges, trees and whatnot, it should surely mean at the time when that guide was adopted. So I'm just thinking that it seems to me that by removing the hedgerows, the applicant could be required to reinstate them. And my personal, I mean, it's not just subjective, it's partly subjective impression of how the street scene would look so much better than the sort of slightly American Midwest style picket fences, which seem to me sort of out of character. If the hedges were reinstated, then in time they would, I mean, they'll never be the same as the traditional mixed hedges which have been ripped out, but I'm thinking also of the discussion we had earlier this evening about the general policy of the Borough Council to conserve and enhance biodiversity, and hedges are a very important part of doing that. And so I would like to suggest that there be, if we do pass this, that it be on a strict condition that mixed hedge should be planted along the boundaries with the highway, and should be sort of looked after and until they're established, and should be retained, because it seems to me that the village design guide is being flouted otherwise, and that seems to me completely wrong. The other thing I would like to say is that I completely agree with the officer, his initial feeling that the way the two bungalows lower down the slope is located is sort of unattractive and unacceptable. And again, it's a matter of sort of subjective impression, but they look a bit like sort of a couple of trucks parked in a lorry park, don't they? I mean, it doesn't look like an attractive group of... But what you have here is a very old established settlement of dwellings where they have grown it's grown organically over time, hasn't it? There was probably originally a homestead and then they were added. This just looks crammed in, which is indeed what it is, and I do agree with the comment on overdevelopment, and if we are advised that that is a valid reason for refusal, I think I would be happy to propose rejection. But if we can't reject it, then I really would like to have those hedgerows put back.
Councillor Moore.
Thank you. Surely we do have grounds on street scene if we are so minded to turn it down. I do applaud the attempt to mirror the one with the existing house, but unfortunately, for probably very good reasons, it's come up larger and it stands uphill, and as you come down the hill, it's going to overpower the original building, and it would probably be better smaller and a different design, because I don't think having them, trying to match them, making one so much larger actually is going to work. I think the street scene will be compromised, not kept with. I think we ought to send it back and say, can you please do something with that plot one? The others I'm fine with, but...
Councillor Sykes.
My point is regarding the village design statement. It was around about 2008 when government put out part of localism that parish plans and neighbourhood plans, not so much neighbourhood plans, visual design statements, were put amongst residents. And as a then parish councillor, I chaired the parish plan for Stanway, which took 2.5 years to do, many hours and hard work. And every part of that plan went back to the planning team to look at, oversee. We had to change, we had to come back, we had to look at the actions and one thing or another. We had to get it exactly right. Well, I know a few months ago when we had planning in Stanway, the planning officer didn't look at the parish plan at all, and I had to make a point to him. What's the point of giving it to local people? They know what they need, they know what they want, they know what their village looks like, their place, their community. We put all this work in, we consult with our residents, and there is a lot of consultation, and in Stanway, because we wanted it to stay alive, we actually took the consultation to Stanway School, where the youth designed their own questionnaire and filled it in, because they designed it the way they wanted it to look in the future along with the adults. But it seems as though it isn't considered at planning guidance. Now, the talk now is neighbourhood plans. Are they going to go the same way? One's being done in Stanway, which is going to take at least till 2017-18. All that work, all that dedication, all that passion locals put in, it seems as though you dismiss it completely.
Councillor Hazel, and then we'll return to the officer.
Thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Sykes puts a very relevant point. It could be said, why bother with all these local plans if they are going to be ignored? I actually quite like the design of plot 1, but I do accept that it's rather large. Plene Cottage looks fine to me, and the bungalows look unbelievably boring, and I'm quite sure a simple, they could be made so much more attractive quite simply. So I would like to send this back to the drawing board quite literally, and for the applicant to bring it back again when perhaps it is more in keeping with the local plan and with local feeling.
Okay, return to Carl Allen. I think the main gist of it seems to be around the local plan.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I think when it comes down to the village design statement, it's how much weight members will give the village design statement to our local plan policies. There's possibly some of the village design statement which is possibly aspirational. I think particularly to the white picket fencing, in theory, that is fencing at the moment in front of Homecroft, which didn't require planning permission. If it's no higher than 1 metre and a white picket fence, it can go up without requiring plan permission. So it's really how much weight the members give this. As already discussed, the plot sizes are already substantially larger than our standard, which would appear to conform to the visual design statement. During the discussions regarding the white picket fence and replacing it with hedging, the agent did catch my eye and indicate that they would be willing to lose the white picket fence and to replace it with a hedge, and we can certainly adapt a condition for the landscaping condition to also include boundary treatments, and also add a condition on there saying notwithstanding the approved details, there shall be no white picket fence. So I think if that's what members are concerned about, then we can overcome that and add that by a condition. Again, design can come down to rather a personal opinion, but it would appear to mirror the existing dwelling quite nicely, and it would possibly be improved upon its impact on the street scene with a hedge planted in front of it.
Could you let the speakers speak, please?
So I think that's perhaps most of the main points covered, I'd hope.
Okay, I have no more speakers, and I have no proposals. Councillor Moore.
I would propose that we send this back to have plot 1 redesigned to be less, it could be as big but not as high. In other words, have the mass lower. And plant trees and stuff, hedges and things.
Councillor Jarvis.
I personally would prefer it to go back in total, because I think it is overdeveloped on that plot and certainly out of character with the local scene. But if you're saying to me that this is difficult on planning grounds, I would certainly support my colleague's proposal there and second that.
Well, I think if we're sending it back, we're sending the whole planning application back. We can't send it back in piecemeal. So, councillors, we have a proposal. Was the proposal to defer?
Yes.
Was it seconded, Chairman?
It was seconded by Councillor Jarvis.
Was it? I didn't hear that.
Are there any implications to the council?
I would second that proposal.
I'll just check if there's any implications to the council for deferring it.
No, I think it seems quite clear from the discussions some of the points you'd like us to look at, and it gives a further opportunity to see if we can negotiate some amendments to it and bring it back to you when you can reconsider it afresh with the changes.
Okay, we have a proposal for deferral. All those in favour?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 in favour, Chairman.
All those against?
None against.
And just me abstaining. Okay, we come to the last one of the night. It's 2 Carlisle Road, Colchester, and it's Carl Allen again.
So this is 2 Close Colchester, which is on the Riverside estate. Proposal is for a 2-storey side extension. The site here is outlined in red, and the extension would go in that location there. These are the existing elevations. I'll just wait a few seconds. So these were the existing elevations. This is the proposal with the 2-storey side extension just there. That would be the elevation onto Bristol Road, and this would be the rear elevation there. Again, you can see how far it comes out here. And just out of interest as well, as members will see in the report, that there was previously a refused application about 3 years ago. So this is what is being proposed. This is what was refused. It is part side extension and also a rear extension as well. So just for comparison, photographs, there's the site there, and this is the area to be which they would like to extend. Again, just going down Bristol Road, sorry. The existing tree and the boundary wall. This is from inside the garden. Again, inside the garden, looking in the area. A further distance view, and you'll see it's a semi-detached dwelling. Come on, red dot. Which forms part of a group of 6 dwellings, and this is a slightly longer view again from Bristol Road. I'll come back to that one later. You'll see that there's considered to be no amenity impacts in regards to overlooking or overshadowing to neighbours. However, it is recommended for refusal because of the impact on the character of the area. Those who know the Riverside estate will know that it's quite a large estate. There's a fairly common thread going through the estate with small groups of houses all sharing a fairly consistent design. While we have allowed some extensions in the past, and that photograph is of number 2, I believe, Bristol Road, which is that one there. So if we go back and have a look at it, this was an approval from 1988 for the 2-storey side extension, and this is being used as a precedent for this application. However, I think although it is close by, the physical constraints of the site are very different. It pretty much follows the width of the existing house and its neighbour. The distance to the highways and the verge are completely different as well. Going back to the refusal reason, in 2012 in the inspector's comments, which dismissed it. I think it's worth just reading them out very quickly. It's on page 133 at 15.4. The appeals, and this is the inspector's comments, the appeal site lies within a housing estate characterised by its high-density development within an open, spacious layout, particularly at corner locations. The proposed two-storey extension, due to its scale, bulk and position, would unacceptably encroach into the corner setting of the appeal property, eroding the openness at this prominent corner location, particularly when viewed along Bristol Road. As regards to precedent, I have considered the proposal before me on its individual merits. Nevertheless, I do consider that to allow the appeal would make it difficult for the council to resist similar proposals. I conclude that the proposal would have an adverse effect on the character and appearance of the surrounding area. And whilst there is some degree of sympathy for the applicant themselves, as this is their third application, and from meeting them on site, there is a need for the space, the impact on the street scene is considered to be a more important matter, and hence why this is being recommended for refusal. What the application? It's this site there, which from another picture there it is there. So that's the area they want to extend. That's from inside. So basically, I think they want to come out to basically where this flower pot is here, a two-storey, and come along there. I hope that helps.
Could I call Mr. Chowdhury, please? Hello, I know it's been a long night. You've seen a few people go through.
I just, before I start, have you councillors seen supporting letters or anything?
We've had all the relevant papers. You have 3 minutes. Bill will go at 2.
Thank you for taking your time and consider the application. As a brief background to myself, I was born and brought up in Colchester. I moved into that property when I was 2 months old. I'm now 28 years old. We're making this application due to overcrowding, and it would vastly improve my family's quality of life. If the committee, obviously you can see that it's in a corner property and there's a substantial amount of space for the extension to be built without any concern of cramming or amenity as highlighted in the planning officer's report. The extension itself will not take up the whole of the plot and will still maintain a sense of openness. From the extension to the pavement, there will still remain an open space of approximately 2.5 metres, and the white beam tree will be kept. In the report, the planning officer refers to policies which they have used to make the decision to recommend refusal. I note that the report only highlights one major point, which is this is of character. I would argue that this extension will respect and enhance the character of the site as set out in the policies. The extension will be in harmony with the design of the existing building and the character of the area. The planning officer's report in paragraph 15.2 states the property conforms in design to a small cluster of dwellings from number 2 to number 12 Carlisle Close. Why are these 3 pairs of semi-detached properties to be looked upon so differently? It appears that they're being officiously singled out to be left exclusively unchanged. The majority of these properties in the area are of the same or similar design to these said properties. There are many examples of properties in Riverside Estate that have changed from the original design, with the extensions having been added in various forms while following the design theme. This leads to my next point, which is precedent. With the application, evidence was submitted that there are a number of properties which have been allowed extensions, including 2-storey side extension. The planning officer has shown the precedent which I'm relying upon. The report states that there are not too many 2-storey extensions. However, this has been refuted by many persons, including my local councillor, Mr. Darius Laws, who unfortunately cannot be here, and he sent a supporting email to Councillor Manning as well. I've also briefly discussed the proposed extension with Will Quince when he was campaigning before the election. He raised no concerns. And I've also contacted other government planners who have looked at the plans and stated that as long as, if there's another property with a similar extension and precedent that's set, no matter how long ago this was granted. My neighbours have signed a petition and they are quite concerned as to why we're being refused, and they've recommended me, if this is refused, to go to Secretary of State or DCLG. In comparisons with the other previous application, it is completely different, and obviously it goes behind to the rear, and this one does not, and therefore I respectfully ask that this application be considered in its own merits. Finally, I would like to conclude with a sentence within the document, Extending Your House, which states, historically, residential buildings have always been extended to altered to suit the requirements of a succession of occupiers. This evolution is a part of the natural aging process of a development and gives character to a place. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Hope you got everything in you wanted to say. Anything to add, Mr. Allen?
I think I could just about keep up with that this time of night, but I understand the gentleman's passion for that. Obviously, he believes it's going to enhance the site. His planning officers believe it will be detrimental to the street scene and the character of the area. There have been a few other changes made. I say, the gentleman's photograph, which he thinks is a precedent. I think in this case it's two completely different sites. It follows the form exactly. Let me get to it. Follows the form exactly with regards to the. No, because this is the extension here, and you can see how much land it had to its side to infill to, and that it follows. It follows the width of the host dwelling perfectly, and also its neighbour. So rather than reading as an extension, it reads more as a terrace, which is, in keeping with the design of the host dwelling. We have allowed two-storey rear extensions, but say this is a prominent corner site, and it would be detrimental to that kind of small grouping of dwellings of six, which belongs to in Carlisle Close. We've had other appeal wins as well in Bristol Road. I had one about a year and a half ago, which was for a front extension, and the inspector there was a very quick, short report agreeing completely about the impact on the street scene and the conformity of the character of the area. So I think that's all I can really say to that.
Councillor Hayes, as the ward councillor.
Well, I think it's very unfortunate that this was called in, and but we haven't heard from the reasons for the call-in, and as far as I can see, no reasons were given in the call-in, except the precedent of the other house, which, as the officer has indicated, is actually pretty different. I'm very familiar with this estate, and its character is quite distinctive, and I do feel anxious about the effect if the precedent is set, as the officer said, and if the inspector's previous conclusion is departed from. As I understand it, we're not concerned with the individual person who applies at all. So although Mr. Chowdhury mentioned sort of personal overcrowding issue and wanting to expand, which obviously is a very sort of common reason for wanting to extend, I'm thinking that we need to put that out of our minds and just think about the purely about the location, the buildings, the appearance, and in this case, the key thing is the street scene. And it does seem to me that it would kind of break the kind of the rhythm of that street. I mean, it's not sort of my personal cup of tea, that sort of architecture, but you can see it's got a very distinctive style. And it also, the sort of the large gardens and the open plan and the shrubs and trees, particularly the shrubs and the lawn, that you find yourself walking across a lot of lawn as you amble around. That's all sort of part of this, the unique sort of feel of the area. And I don't think I can support this application. I'm sorry.
Councillor Chillingworth.
Chairman, I have a great deal of sympathy with the applicant. Whoever he is, whoever lived in that house, I could see why they might want to extend it. The problem is this inspector decision, so recent. Can I just find out exactly what he refused in comparison with what we are looking at, please?
So it's up a little while ago, I just whizzed back to it. So this is the scheme before us now. And this is the review scheme of 2012. So side extension there, and it also came out of the rear. But as you can see in the inspector's reports, they were concerned about the impact on the street scene and the overall character.
I just find it fairly extraordinary that we're turning this down on the basis of this inspector, when on almost any other similar period development in the town, we seem to accept extensions. I just find this rather extraordinary that this particular estate appears to be so sacrosanct. Is the architecture so unique and must be preserved that we can't allow a modest extension on a site, on a road where other extensions have taken place of a larger nature? I ask the questions, but perhaps others will see the same problem as I do.
Okay, I've got three more councillors. I've got myself, Councillor Scott, Councillor Hazel. From my perspective, the changing roof heights of the extension, I think, makes it look quite ugly, but I know that's one of our policies of development, and I've never understood it, and I don't think I ever will understand it. I would much rather it looked as part of or in keeping with the building that was already there. I don't understand why we have to have this idea that it has to look like an extension. But I'm sure Mr. Tyrrell or Mr. Allen will correct me on that. I'm kind of in the Peter Chillingworth boat here. I don't really know why we should even come to this. I understand it's not policy. I can understand why the last application was turned down with the large bit out the back. That was quite large. It was quite overbearing. But I'm a bit loath to go against. I can't find enough about it to go against an officer's recommendation. And with the inspectors backing up what we've said in previous times, I'd like to go against the officer's recommendation, I really would, but I just can't think. I would have to have a really good reason to do it, and I'm going to leave it to other councillors to convince me. So do a good job. Councillor Scott.
Right. I would like to propose that we accept this application, and the reason is that I don't think that it's out of character. I know that it's intimidating that an inspector has turned down something which at first glance seems similar, but actually what was turned down was much larger, included an extension to the back, and was quite a different application, and so I don't think we should be intimidated in that way. I also feel that if you look at the photograph, if you took out the shrubs and roses, like most unscrupulous people would have done, you would have said, oh, you might as well put a bit of house on there. And so we have to think about that and not be swayed by or disadvantage somebody because they keep their garden in a very attractive way. So I definitely propose that we accept the application because it's in keeping with, it's a reasonable improvement in the house, and there are no objections whatsoever from the people living there. So who are we to come swooping down and tell those people you should want that changed?
Councillor Hazel.
I second that proposal, Chair. I find it quite extraordinary that other people have been allowed to extend and this this plan has been turned down. With regard to the shrub roses, I agree with Councillor Scott, and there is actually still room for shrubs and garden to be outside that extension. I think actually an extension could well enhance that house if it's properly, sensitively done. And I don't think we ought to turn down this application. Thank you.
Councillor Moore and Councillor Jarvis.
Thank you. In my opinion, the 70s was the nadir of house design. I do not know why this is being treated like an icon, this particular corner. I actually think the extension will give a little well-needed relief to what otherwise could be mistaken for a parade of shops. But that is my particular opinion about that particular design, and unfortunately there's a lot of it around. I'm all for giving a bit of variety.
I'm slowly becoming convinced. Councillor Jarvis.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I must say I disagree with some of the comments there. I do think that this design, as it was in its time, was intended to be open plan. And I think that if you were to build an extension on that, there would be a severe impact on the open plan aspect, particularly, as it says, looking down that main road, the road, Bristol Road. If you come to that corner there, you have a Bristol Road, you have a clear vista down that road of open plan design. If you put an extension on there, it's blocked out. And I do think it would set a precedent for others to go round and apply for these types of extensions, which I think would destroy the origin of the development, which was an open plan development. So I have to say I am in support of the recommendations for refusal.
I take it that's a proposal. Have we got a seconder for that proposal? Councillor Hayes. Right. Mr. Allen, if you could respond, and if there are any financial implications to overturning an officer's decision, I would quite like to hear about them.
Well, I don't think in this case going for an approval against a recommendation for refusal would have any kind of financial implications, as there would be no appeal to be made. I would agree completely, of course, with Councillor Hayes' comments about the Riverside estate. It may be to a lot of people it's very much of its time, but there is an incredible design conformity when you drive around or walk around it, and you really do get a strong sense of place here. It may be a 1970s place, but it's still a strong sense. And this site in particular, being located on the corner, an extension to the site here would, reduce the openness of this site completely. The fact that the boundary wall would have to be repositioned again really just shows that it's inappropriate to extend as much as they want to. So, the inspector's decision may have been 3 years ago, but our policies are still in place. And as the inspector themselves made the comment that if it were to be approved, then it would be pretty much a very strong precedent to other sites which have a small side area, which is in an open position. That would be almost a green light, and it would be very, very difficult for the council to refuse anything on that site. I say, just going back to the site opposite, which is the extension from the 80s, again, I think you can just see how different that site is with the amount of space they had, and that there's still a decent amount of open space here on the corner, and that it follows the form perfectly, and it reads as part of its same being. And the building line as well, as my colleague just mentioned, it pushes the extension would push the dwelling further into the street, whereas this one just continues the form. So I would recommend councillors to go with a recommendation to refuse it on the design terms. The applicant would be at liberty to appeal the decision, and then again it's in the court of the appeal inspector to make a decision based on our refusal reason.
Okay, we have no more speakers. We have two proposals on the table, both of which have been seconded.
Chairman, has the planning officer given you any details of risks attached to a potential decision to overturn an officer's recommendation?
Well, as Cole said, there wouldn't be any financial risks because you wouldn't appeal an approval, and you would have to have an interest in the land to challenge it through judicial review, which, from the sounds of it, none of the local residents have either an interest in the land or an interest in actually challenging the decision anyway. The risk is purely that this council's made a decision before that the side extension here is unacceptable. Which I would say was the right decision. It went to appeal, and an inspector has also decided that that was the right decision. He didn't chuck the appeal out. If you look at his reasons, based on the rear extension, it was the erosion sideways into the open area that was a loss of character. If you look at the ordnance survey plan on page 129, you'll notice that the properties behind this one start to move back within the site. So what you get is a prominent view from front, side, and from the rear when approaching. So what you'll see is all three sides of this extension, and that's the issue. It's not the property type or anything like that. It's this exact corner position and the siting of everything around it and the prominence. If you look at the other end of the street, for example, the houses then start to push further forwards from the side of the house on the opposite end, immediately north, if you're looking at page 129. And that's the sort of place where you can extend sideways without becoming a prominent addition that starts to detract from the openness of the area. So it's this exact site circumstances. My first house was this exact house type, and I know what it's like for space in these houses. They're great houses and they're very popular, and the 70s architecture isn't necessarily everybody's favourite, but these are solid, sound family homes. But not every house is capable of being extended, and that's one of the reasons why I moved out of the one that I occupied.
Okay, so we have two proposals on the table. I believe the recommendation to approve the application, I'm assuming subject to necessary conditions to be put on by the officer, is the first one that we're going to vote on.
Chairman, if you're going to vote, consider voting on that, it is in opposition to a recommendation from an officer. Do you or the committee want to just state whether you consider the risks that have been put before you are low or not?
I think what I've been asked is, do we want to invoke the drop procedure? I'm not convinced that in this particular case the risks are significant enough to do that. I would be interested to hear from Mr Tyrrell if he thought the risks were significant enough to invoke the drop.
No, they're not. But if it helps, I could suggest that the conditions, if you are minded to approve, would need to be that it's the drawing numbers that have been submitted, matching materials, and a landscaping scheme for the publicly visible areas, a simple landscaping conditions, all of which are standard conditions, so we can sort that out. But nothing else really would need to be conditioned if it was approved.
Okay. So, all those in favour of accepting the scheme, overturning the officer's decision, please raise your hand now.
Chairman, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in favour.
All those against?
That's 1, 2, 3, 4.
And
against.
abstentions?
And 2 abstentions, thank you.
Okay. So that's carried.